Okay. All right. So good evening, delegates, alternates, members, and staff. We've got quite a few people here today. I am Megan Dayton, our statewide president. Welcome to the first resolution forum where we will discuss the resolutions that were submitted for consideration at MAPE's 2021 Delegate Assembly. Like I said, this is the first of two forums, and it's just the second time that MAPE has convened a forum to discuss resolutions with a statewide audience before Delegate Assembly. Joining me here today are Lynn Butcher, statewide secretary, and the chief authors of each resolution. And staff are also here to help if needed. I'm not super great at monitoring the chat, but I will do my best. But feel free to message any of the staff members who are here and they can help you probably more quickly than I can. Britton Mickelson has their camera on, so feel free to message. Or Paul Schweizer is here too, our business manager. Sierra Plunkett is also staff. They're all here to assist us. Leah Solo is here as well. All right, so the agenda for today is pretty straightforward. First, I'll run through how we'll moderate the Q&A. This will be followed by presentations by the chief authors and their answers to questions you submit. The authors will present in this order. Lynn Butcher will be number 1, 4, and 5. John Ferrara, number 2. Kirsten Peterson, number 3. I'll be presenting on behalf of the Elections Committee for number 6 and Todd Mackey for number 7. Our time is a little bit limited. We do have an hour, but let's get started. We will start with a few tips on using the Zoom meeting. Everyone is muted, I believe. I didn't do that, but you come in muted. You can unmute yourself when you're called upon to ask a question. If you have a question, use the raise hand function to get in the queue to ask a question. To raise your hand, just click on the reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then click raise hand. I'll let you know when it's your turn and then you can unmute yourself. After you ask your question, please remute yourself and lower your hand if I haven't done it already for you. We won't be using the chat box to ask questions. Like I mentioned, I'm not great at monitoring the chat box. It says I have the chat set to only come to hosts and we won't be answering questions submitted via chat. So let's get started with presentation number 1. Secretary Butcher, if you're here and ready to go, ready for your presentation, go ahead and walk us through resolution number 1.
Thank you, President Dayton. Can everyone see my screen share?
Yes.
Okay. So resolution number 1 is regarding providing for an alternate chair for the Judicial Committee in case both the president and vice president are subject of a complaint. It's pretty straightforward in that it's right now the way that the language is if someone brings a complaint and it involves the president, the vice president takes over as the chair of the judicial hearing. If it has both the president, if a complaint is filed against both the president and vice president, there is no provision for a chair. And so this just fixes that by offering other members of the executive committee to be the chair. And so it really is just simple language added to section 2 under term of office. If both the president and vice president are participants in the complaint, a remaining executive committee member will become the chair. And it's that simple. So if anyone has any questions, I am here to answer those.
Thank you, Secretary Butcher. Any questions about resolution number 1? Galen S. from MnDOT.
Hi there. Thank you all. I appreciate the presence of these forums. The question I had about this one is there any concern about potential conflicts of interests if it's the vice president presiding on a judicial as the chair of the Judicial Committee over a complaint involving the president and or vice versa? And if so, should we instead consider slight changes to the wording that would dictate that an alternate would be selected if either the president or the vice president are subject to a complaint, rather than if I assume rarer circumstances of both of them being subject of the same complaint? Thank you.
Thank you, Galen. I could see that being a concern, and am certainly open to amendment of the language to include some provision in that way. And I'm assuming that that amendment would be more than 5 words. And so if you have that amendment, then you can send that to me ahead of delegate assembly, and we'll bring it up at the delegate assembly. But I could see that being a concern, and I'm certainly open to a change in that.
Thanks for that question and for the answer. Sherilyn Helgerts.
Hi there. Is there any potential problem with there not being a manner specified for how the alternate, the remaining executive committee member would become the chair? Is it fairly clear like how that would be selected, who would be selecting?
Looks like we're scrolling down to get an answer.
I apologize, folks. There's a weird thing that happens when I screen share, and it's hard for me to find my mute button. Again, I could see that as being a concern. I think that would actually need to be, the language would need to be amended in Article 18, because that is where the filing of the complaint is. And so if that were a concern for you, then that would need to be amended under Article 18.
Okay, good questions. Any other questions on resolution number 1? Okay, well, thank you, Lynn. Let's move on to resolution number 2. John Ferrara, are you here with us today? I'm not seeing John's name. I don't think John is with us here today. A little bit about resolution number 2. I'm not going to speak to the actual resolution itself, but this resolution in its exact same format was heard by the board of directors at the August board meeting. The board voted this resolution down. And so the executive committee talked over what to do in a situation where a resolution has been heard by one governing body and is waiting to be heard by another with overlapping jurisdiction. And so what we're planning to do is, for this resolution, because it was submitted on time, it was submitted on time to delegate assembly, but it was also voted down by the board. The chair at delegate assembly, which is me, will rule this resolution out of order. And then one of our executive committee members will appeal the decision of the chair because it has been heard, but that would allow the assembly and all of our delegates by vote to determine if the resolution will be heard. So that's the plan for resolution number 2 regarding board work groups. I just want to check one more time. Is John Ferrara here? Okay. If John shows up, somebody let me know if you see him come in, and we can come back to resolution number 2. In the meantime, let's move on to resolution number 3. Kirsten Peterson, if you're here and would like to share your video, go ahead and walk us through resolution number 3, please.
Thank you, President Dayton. My apologies ahead of time. I'm pretty sure that Oliver is going to have a lot to say about this resolution too, because he doesn't want to leave me alone. So please forgive me ahead of time
for anybody who didn't know.
Yeah, for the uninvited interruption there. So anyway, thank you. I am Kirsten Peterson. I'm a Region 18 delegate, and I'm here today also as the chair of the Meet and Confer for the Department of Employment and Economic Development. The resolution that I'm presenting today has to do with some changes that aim to build more power for our union by allowing committees to be more intentional about diverse representation and firm up some of the procedures and roles and responsibilities. The beefy one, so hang in there with me. This resolution is co-sponsored by the Minute Meet and Confer Chair, Andy Morris, the Revenue Meet and Confer Chair, Christine Moody, and the Department of Health Meet and Confer Chair, Jen Palm. So we're trying to achieve three things with this resolution. There's three distinct separate areas that I'm going to go through. The first is to expand the available committee seats up to 12. Current language allows us up to 6 committee members and 2 alternates. So for many meet and confer committees, especially those of large agencies, and when I say large, I mean generally those that have 1,000 or more, it's hard to get a diverse team of leaders when there's a limit of 6, 7, 8, 9 people on it. It creates a lot of barriers because the larger an agency gets, the more complex and diverse the mission of the agency becomes. We all know that our agencies do so many different things, especially as they get bigger. Indeed alone, we have over 30 work units, we have 52 work sites, we have dozens of classifications, and we have members from all walks of life. The challenge with committee appointments is trying to achieve something resembling true representation. We need to identify not just leaders, but we need to identify leaders from a variety of work units, divisions. We need BIPOC leaders, we need LGBTQ+ leaders, we need disabled leaders, we need veteran leaders, and we need leaders who live both in Metro and Greater Minnesota and have worked in those spaces so they can bring all of those viewpoints to our union. So as you can see, trying to hit each of those types of leaders alone fills up the 6 committee appointments, and allowing committees and the president via the board to appoint additional members gives agencies the flexibility that they need to strike the balance between all of those different demographics and to represent people from all walks of life in our bargaining unit. The second thing that this resolution achieves is to set a more consistent date for the election of the Meet and Confer speaker. Right now, the language says the speaker shall be elected at the negotiations convention. That language was written prior to COVID. As we've all learned this year, big formal gatherings where we get to come together and celebrate our union and plan out what we're going to do for our next contract are not a guarantee anymore. So this language, what it does is it proposes to move the speaker election to within 1 month of settling a tentative agreement with the state like we just did. That won't impact the elections this year. That'll probably be the one 2 years out because we're well past that month. So the main duty, one of the main duties of the speaker is to represent Meet and Confer negotiations and to coordinate supplemental planning across agencies. Electing a new speaker right after the tentative agreement allows that person well over a year to work and plan with the other chairs, their supplemental coordination and their game plan for the next contract, rather than the current language, which depending on when the negotiations summit is held, it lands anywhere between 3 and 6 months before the start of the next round of bargaining, which 3 to 6 months is not enough time for anyone to lay out a statewide plan like that. The third and the last thing that this resolution aims to achieve is to establish a secretary role for each committee. Just like the vice chair, they'll be elected by the committee. This allows for an official secretary title on the MAPE website and creates some bylaw accountability to create and maintain minutes. Transparency is our goal and a cultural norm, and I think expectation in a lot of parts of MAPE. And this is another way that we can make sure members know what's happening in their union and know where their voices are being represented. It's happening already pretty consistently in most agencies, but I think it's still important to define that role. With that, that is my long-winded summary of Resolution 3. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Any questions for, any questions for Kirsten on resolution number 3? S. Schmidt.
Shauna, sorry, I didn't change my name yet. Just a quick question. This is just me not remembering a lot of stuff. So the limiting the terms to 3 2-year terms, is that consistent with other positions in MAPE?
I think just about every other position in MAPE is 3 2-year terms.
Okay.
I think that there are any that
Thanks.
aren't. I forgot to mention that. Thanks, Shauna.
Yeah, I started looking it up the other day and then I ran out of time and here we are.
Good question. Thanks, Shauna. Tanya Rolfson.
So does the appointment of the chair, is it alternate years from the elections? So that, how does that work and jive with the elections? Because I think people were just elected last term, and then now you're going to have someone appointed chair within a couple months or whatever. So is it kind of an alternate thing?
I'm only laughing because it's a question that I've gotten a lot, and so there's 2 distinct positions. One is the meet and confer chair for your agency, and you're right, we were all just elected in June of 2020, and that next election will be June of 2022. The meet and confer speaker is a different role. That's when all of the 16 chairs or so get together and elect someone to represent the 16 of us on the board, executive committee, and negotiations. So it's the chairs electing another chair to lead us, and that election currently in the bylaws happens at the negotiations convention. Does that make sense?
Yes, and so the reason for having this chair of the chairs is to be on that executive committee as well as in negotiations.
I believe so. I think that was written before my time in MAPE, so maybe it's somebody who's been around longer can speak to the intent of it. But yeah, that's how it's written, as the speaker of the meet and confers shall represent meet and confers on negotiations, the executive committee, and the board.
Any other questions, Tanya?
That's it. Good.
Okay, thanks. Secretary Butcher.
So Kirsten, this actually piggybacks off of Tanya's question. So the chairs are elected and then the chairs elect their speaker. If you're electing the speaker kind of off cycle, then you have the potential of electing a speaker who then may not re-win election as a chair. And so the potential exists to elect a speaker who is then in the following year not elected again as chair of their meet and confer committee. And so you're setting up actually a situation here where you're going to have a re-election in that case. And I think maybe that was Tanya's question as well. So the reason that the speaker was elected after elections happened was to prevent that from happening. And what you're setting up here is a situation where maybe unintended consequences are happening there. Have you thought about that?
I had not. No, that's a really good point. But so my initial response is that there is language within the meet and confer committee bylaws that say if there's a vacancy in the meet and confer speaker, the chairs shall elect a new speaker at a meeting, is what it says. So I think that if that were to happen, hopefully it wouldn't, but if that were to happen, then it would be incumbent on the chairs to elect somebody new. It would be midstream, but I don't know that there's a perfect way to solve this problem that both allows the leaders to have plenty of time to lead and to make sure that there's, continuous representation. I think it's something that hopefully PA will wrestle with and have a good solution for. Thanks, Lynn. That's a good point.
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up if I can. So then does that not kind of negate the purpose of seating that speaker earlier in the cycle? So if you have to replace them, you're replacing them potentially without enough time to do what you're intending to do by electing early. Because if someone has to be replaced, then that whole purpose of seating them early to really establish and get your process down or what you want to bring forward to meet and confer. If you have to replace that speaker, then that kind of eliminates that.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think that can happen with any elected position though, because that midstream, something could happen and they have to leave.
All right, thanks, Kirsten, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn.
Okay, Rose Nording.
Okay, I was just thinking, one of the proposals was to expand the committee seats to up to 12. So I was just wondering about costs and if this does increase the costs and if this has been taken into account. I mean, as far as the budget, has this been included in, or how much does this include or increase the budget, I guess is what I'm asking.
I think it could increase the budget. This is the question that I got at my local, but it was more like our local is going to have to bear this cost. Treasurer Mackey might have to correct me, but it's my understanding that there is a standalone budget for all of the meet and confer committees that they pull from. That's at the board's discretion to, you know, increase or decrease. Is that right? I could just be making that up.
No, as the statewide treasurer, I can jump in and say, yes, you are correct. There is a statewide meet and confer budget. And most of the time, meet and confer pre-meets and post-meets are over the lunch hour. So we don't use a lot of those funds. This does have the potential to like double the cost if every meet and confer team went from 6 to 12 members. But it also depends on when they're meeting, not just the number of members. The overall idea is if this does pass as a resolution, then the board finance work group would meet and recommend a budget adjustment for calendar year 2022 to cover the additional anticipated cost.
Thanks. So I thought that's how it worked, but I wasn't 100% sure. Thank you.
Looks like Tanya might have a follow-up to that. Tanya Rolfson. Tanya, we can't hear you. If you're speaking, you're still muted. There
Thank
we
you.
go.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have all the language and bylaws in front of me, but when I was reading what I was reading, it wasn't certain that you had to have exactly the same person be part of the executive committee as you did on the negotiations team representing meet and confers. And so is it important to have the chair fulfill both of those roles, or might it be better to have someone, two different people do those roles?
I don't know, is resolution 4 still on the table? I think that resolution 4 might resolve that one if it's still on the table. If not, maybe it's one we should revive and bring up to the board, because you're right, it's a lot of work on one person. It's like 4 different roles, and the way the bylaws are currently written, they have to do all 4: negotiations, board, executive committee, and lead the meeting for chairs, and then all of the other tacit stuff that goes along with that. I'd agree, is a lot. I didn't include that in this one, but I don't remember if 4 is still out there or not.
It is.
So maybe that'll be answered the next one. Let's see.
Okay, good questions on this one. Any other questions on resolution 3? Okay, resolution 4, back over to Lynn Butcher, Secretary Butcher.
Thank you. And I do think, Kirsten, that this will address that question. So this resolution does 2 things, 2 main things. It establishes the meet and confer chairs as a separate committee. Currently, the meet and confer chairs meet as an ad hoc body, which means that they are not governed by the MAPE bylaws. And we don't have a space for them to do meeting minutes. And this would then establish them as a committee with a committee chair and a secretary, and that would be separate from the speaker role. It also clarifies the speaker role. So when the restructure, I'm sorry, it's the end of the day, folks, please bear with me. When the restructure was done, the speaker role was really not clarified well, and it just was, as Kirsten just pointed out and as Tanya pointed out, a lot. It's essentially 4 roles in one. We have determined as a union that folks should do 1 role and do it well. In part to alleviate burnout, in part to make sure that there's opportunities for all members to engage. And so, one member doing multiple roles, both is very hard to do in addition to a state job. And it's just very hard to do all of those roles well. And so what this does is it clarifies and provides some guidance on what that role should look like. And I'll get into the language so that you can see what that is. So we've added the Meet and Confer Chairs Committee as a standing committee. It establishes that there will be a chair of that committee. And then it also establishes the speaker role. And so the speaker is a member of negotiations and then will act as a liaison between the executive committee and the MAPE board. So rather than serving as a member of the executive committee and a member of the MAPE board, the role will be transformed to be a liaison, essentially reporting to the board strategic information or information about what the Meet and Confer committees are working on, so that that information can be included in strategic decision making. What this does, again, is it alleviates some of the pressure on that position. Currently, that position has been acting kind of as the chair of the ad hoc committee or the ad hoc group, is a full member of the executive committee, a full member of the board, and a full member of negotiations. Those are all, again, full-time positions, basically, when you combine them together. It does leave the negotiations convention in there. And so if the language in Kirsten's resolution passes, then that can be incorporated into this as well. And I think that is it. So what questions do you have for me there?
Kirsten Peterson.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay, first, I'm glad you verified what I was thinking there. I appreciate it. So I like how you split out the speaker and the chair. I think that will be helpful. My concern is that the responsibilities for the Meet and Confer committee, the language that's written in here, or the Meet and Confer chairs committee, to my knowledge, was not actually brought to any chairs. And I think some of the stuff that's written in there doesn't necessarily comport with what our goals are. And so I guess that's my main concern about this, is that as far as I know, we have not seen this.
Okay, I apologize, Kirsten, you cut out a little bit on me in your statement. Could you just repeat what you said? I apologize.
Sure. So my main question was, I like most of the language here, but my concern about how the Meet and Confer Chairs Committee is defined and the duties that are listed in there was not brought to the Meet and Confer chairs, at least to my recollection, and perhaps it's just me. And so my concern is that there wasn't any input from the chairs on it, and I don't know how well it comports with our goals and the needs of our committees to work together.
Sure. And you certainly can offer an amendment or speak against this resolution to that point, Kirsten.
Okay, Shauna Schmidt.
Just had a quick question or clarification when it talks about those two roles within the committee being split, the chairing of the committee and then being the speaker of the committee. I think the word chair is used a lot and I was getting confused. So what you mean by the chairs shall choose one of their members to chair the Meet and Confer committee, you mean the administrative job of chairing the actual meeting, right?
That is correct, Shauna, and I agree. It is confusing because it's the Meet and Confer Chair Committee, and so the chair of the Meet and Confer Chair Committee is also a Meet and Confer Chair, so they're chairs.
Yep. There's no good way to get around that, though.
There isn't. I mean, I suppose we could say the members of the committee would elect their chair, or would decide on their chair, but that's exactly it. So the chair of the Meet and Confer Chairs Committee would act as a chair of any other committee, be responsible for scheduling meetings, be responsible for making sure that the minutes are kept, Not that they would keep the minutes, they can appoint a secretary, but that they would handle the administrative tasks of that committee.
Could we add in administratively chair the committee? Or would that be confusing because it'd be different from all the other stuff? Yeah.
You know, it's up to you, Shauna. You certainly can offer an amendment
No, I don't want to make it more confusing.
on that, but I did try to keep the language similar to the other committees in the definition of chair.
Okay. I mean, obviously, I eventually got it by reading it multiple times, so it's cool.
Don't we all do that with the governing documents? Read them over and over and over again.
Yes.
Any
And
other questions,
over.
Shauna?
Nope.
Okay. Nicholas
Yes,
Snavely.
I have a question. I raise my hand. Sorry.
Oh, I've got you up next after
Okay.
Nicholas Snavely.
Yes, in regards to the makeup of the executive committee or group, I should say, this would make an even vote unless you have some other amendment or ever the resolution to deal with not having an odd vote.
The
How we
next
deal with that.
resolution, the next
Okay.
resolution deals with that, Nicholas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, Nicholas?
Nope.
Okay. Alvin L.
Yes, hi. I think that I will lead to what was said about meet and confer committee responsibilities. I do not recall that we discussed that within our meet and confer. So I'm just wondering, will you give any opportunity to meet and confer chair later on to talk about their responsibility, or that's it? Because this is making me comfortable that we are doing that backward. I thought that we would gather input from the committee first, and then you can summarize those, and that can reflect what different committees, meet and confer committee are thinking. Because some of the stuff that we are doing, I do not see that here. So I don't know. I'm just uncomfortable with this section.
So again, like any other resolution, you're able to offer amendments to expand the language or change the language. That's the beauty of delegate assembly, is that you are able to do that.
Yes, Lynn, I understand what you said, but usually within our committee, we think as a team, we reflect, we have a short meeting. So I don't know, maybe that was my mistake not to read this before, but I just feel like I'll feel more comfortable discussing this within my committee than just out and take a decision for them. But anyway, I'm going with the majority. What you decide is just like, I wish we could have had that opportunity to talk about this, and then some of the stuff that we are doing can be reflected here. So anyway, that's all I have to share.
Yeah, and for that, I mean, I think the intention was that this would be posted with the other resolutions when the other resolutions were out, which, you know, is intended to give enough time for people to have their conversations about what needed to be changed or whatnot. This was actually missed in our submission email. It was included in the submission email, but the attachment was missed. And so that's one of the reasons I think this is maybe a shocker to people, is that they just received it recently, which maybe gave you a little less time to talk about it and determine whether or not you needed to do submit amendments. Again, this was the idea that Tess and I and a few others had in terms of addressing the gap of having the meet and confer chairs have an actual committee. And so, you know, if meet and confer chairs would like to offer amendments to the language here in terms of the purpose of the committee, you certainly can do so.
Okay, Tim Beskey.
Yeah, some talk about possibly renaming the chair to administrative chair. Just from my perspective, Robert's rules refers to chairman or president, vice chair, secretary or clerk. So for at the board at one point, we had a discussion about deviating from Robert's rules. So just in case anybody wants to rename the title of the chair, it's really best if we stick closely to what Robert's rules have. So that's all.
Somebody's been studying in advance of delegate assembly, Tim Beskey, Gold Star. All right, Tanya Rolfson.
I just had a question again about the liaison. I'm not seeing the full screen. It will act as a liaison between the meet and confer, chair committee, and executive committee. Okay. Okay, so essentially they're going to be the speaker, the main function of the speaker will be to be part of negotiations. And otherwise, they're just going to be a reporter to these other groups on what meet and confer has done. Essentially, that's it. They won't be involved in the other committees, and that's a way to lighten the load. I got that right?
That's right, Tanya. And I think that the thinking was with the liaison position that the board and the executive committee would actually get more input from the meet and confer chairs than they have than they were before, by limiting the role as a liaison for the purposes specifically of bringing information forward from the meet and confer committees for inclusion and strategic decision making.
The other question I had is, it seems like the ordinance or the sequence of these bylaws and when they'll be voted on or dealt with almost needs to be switched. If we're talking about expanding the meet and confer, and then also when someone needs to be elected or appointed the chair, it almost seems like we need to know what that chair is going to have to do. And it'd be nice to have this to be voted on first before we talked about when the person is going to be voted in. But
I don't have control over the order.
no.
Maybe not control over the order, but Lynn, do you have any maybe just guidance for what Tanya is speaking to with any conflicts between the language in the resolutions?
I don't find conflicts. The conflict would be perhaps there needs to be a proviso added to this resolution that if the previous resolution is passed in its entirety, including the election piece of it, the timing of the election. So that I think is the only conflict that I see, is that we maintained the speaker being elected at the negotiations convention, but the previous resolution does not. And so I can see there being a conflict there, and that would need to be amended if this one were to pass, if both resolutions were to pass.
Does that help, Tanya?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Nicholas Snavely.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to the reorganization of MAPE's structure and when the chair was put on the executive team and negotiations. I think the intent at that time was really kind of a two-way piece of communication, not just to say report to the exec team, but also to be able to bring back conversations from the exec team back down to the chairs of the meet confers. And so that would be one concern I would have, is that we're losing that portion if we're just reporting to the chair or to the exec team, but not, having a voting say anymore, and not able to bring back the conversations back to the chairs in regards to what happened at the exec meeting that was appropriate to share with them, and vice versa for other groups such as the board of directors. So just a comment on that regard.
Yep, I hear that concern, Nick, and to provide a couple of some additional context there. The executive committee earlier last year actually did an exercise to kind of clarify the roles of the participants on the executive committee. And I share your view that that was the intent of the structure. However, that was not shared by either the speaker or the chairs, that was part of the responsibilities and that wasn't being done. And so I don't know that if that's changed or not, but I don't think that was structured into clearly defined in the restructure. The other thing is, and this is addressed in the next resolution, is that the purpose for adding the speaker and the 2 chairs to the executive committee during that restructure was that we were preparing for, at that time, Friedrich's decision in preparation for losing the fair share that came obviously with Janice, but we did the restructure in preparation for the Friedrich's decision. The thinking was that after we lost the fair share, that the board would go to meeting more like a quarterly meeting rather than monthly, but the executive committee would be meeting more often and therefore would need expanded representation to make sure that it wasn't just the constitutional officers making decisions. The board has not met, has not gone to quarterly meetings, and in fact has been meeting more often than monthly. And so the addition of these positions have added a significant cost, but also I don't necessarily think that they are operating in the way that you feel they should, and that I feel they should, and that is why we're bringing this forward to clarify that. Again, the stress of being on the executive committee, the board, negotiations. There was a reason that the delegate assembly several years ago determined that board members could not serve as negotiators, and that was because of the responsibility of both of those positions. And so removing that responsibility, that dual responsibility, and in this case, in the case of the speaker, it is a quadruple responsibility, is just ensures that we actually have the capability of bringing the information forward. As a liaison, they can certainly address the board. They can talk about the issues. They can advocate for positions on governing decisions that they see attached to the issues that they're bringing forward with the meet and confer. But it actually streamlines and makes our process a little bit better so that they can focus on making sure that the issues that are identified by meet and confer committees are being incorporated into both strategic planning and or strategic decision making and negotiations without being overly burdensome.
All right, good questions. I love a resolution that gets people thinking about our governing documents and Robert's rules. Any other questions for Secretary Butcher on resolution number 4? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so let's move on to resolution 5, and they're somewhat topically related, at least with the governing body that they address. So take it away, Lynn.
All right, it's me again. And this is a very similar, this is, I would say, tied to the previous resolution as well. This, as I just laid out, the political council and organizing council chairs were added to the executive committee with the assumption that the board of directors would reduce the number of regular meetings to quarterly as a cost-saving measure. That essentially in serving as chair and as serving on the executive committee and board, they are holding multiple positions, and that the councils were created to implement strategic work around membership, member engagement, political and legislative priorities, and the participation in the executive committee and board really does split the focus of the chairs to be not entirely focused on those areas. So the resolution is to remove those 2 positions from the executive committee and board and redefine them as liaison positions, similar to the defining of the speaker role in the previous resolution.
Okay, what questions are floating out there for this one? Liz Pearson.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, for explaining this. Was the proposal to remove them from the executive committee brought to any of the chairs for their feedback or input or anything prior to writing of this resolution?
So this is not a proposal from the executive committee. This is a proposal from a group of members who identified an issue with the bylaws.
Okay, so did those members bring it to the committees to see, to gauge how they would feel about that?
We did not.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks, Liz. Nicholas Snavely.
Thank you. I guess back to my original question from the last one. So previous one was based off removal of one position. This is the removal of 3 positions. So that still gives us an even number on the exec committee. So can you clarify where we have an odd number vote on the exec committee with the removal of these 3 positions?
I sure can, Nick. Actually, we have an even number with these positions because the chair of the executive committee does not vote. And so we have an even number right now where there is a possibility, a probability, if we have a tied vote, that the chair will have to be the deciding vote. By removing these positions, we are down to 3 voting members with a chair. And so that pretty much guarantees no tied vote and no tiebreaker vote.
Just to elaborate on that, I get asked that question a lot within MAPE and in other places. And I think the issue of having an odd number of people on a board or on any governing body is somewhat irrelevant because someone can always abstain from the vote, which could create a tie no matter how many members are there, or somebody could not be present. So I think what Lynn is saying is right. And the chair serves as a tiebreaker in the event of a tie of voting members of the body. And we could always tiebreaker by dual. So we've got backups, so we're good. Any other questions, Nicholas?
Nope, that was just the main concern, I think, during the restructure is making sure we had odd numbers so that voting was a little cleaner when needed. And I guess I'm just surprised that at this time the exec board has maybe a non-odd number vote, but if it is so that the chair does not vote except during a tie, then that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. And in that case, when the chair doesn't vote, it would actually make sense to have an even number of members total, including the chair, because then you have an odd number of voting members. So either way, it just works out. Okay, any other questions for Secretary Butcher on resolution number 5? Okay, thanks, Lynn. We will give you a break from talking for a little while. On to resolution number 6. This resolution is brought forward from the Elections Committee. We did not have a member of the Elections Committee who was able to speak on this to speak to this resolution tonight. So I'm going to walk through it. I also asked for the Elections Committee to address this gap in the governing documents, and so it makes sense that I would speak to it. So right now, our elections rules are a little bit unclear, where nominations can be made. It's not clear whether nominations should be or could be limited based on the member's location in locals or regions. And so I asked the Elections Committee to decide within themselves whether they think that that should be limited or not, and then to bring a resolution forward. So the Elections Committee decided to bring forward a resolution that does limit nominations based on the member's local or region. And so what this resolution does is says that in the nominations procedure for elections rules, Article 3, Section 3, starting with A, nominations for local positions can only come from members of that same local. Similarly, in B, nominations for regional positions can only come from members of that region. And then nominations for statewide positions can still come from anybody. So that's the change from this one. Pretty clean and straightforward, but any questions on resolution number 6? Okay, you guys are gonna let me go that easy. I like it. Okay, Todd, I think we are on to you, Todd Mackey with resolution number 7. Go ahead.
Thanks, President Dayton. Resolution 7 came out of a discussion that we were having with the executive committee. And basically the idea here is to for us to adjust the timing of our elections. So before we restructured MAPE, to my memory, we had 2 sets of elections. We elected statewide officers in the fall and then regional and local officers in the spring. And the restructure wanted to put those elections together and hold them once during the year. And they picked spring as the time to do that. The problem that we've been running into is that having elections while we're trying to negotiate a contract is really a distraction. And then what we end up with is new regional directors on the board. And the first action is to review our tentative agreement every 2 years with the state. If that happens and we're successful in push week during June, and make a recommendation on how to vote for members. So the idea here is to move the statewide and regional elections to the fall when it's the natural elections time in the country, right? And so it's going to take 2 years to adjust that cycle. At least that's the way this is proposed. So Lynn, if you scroll down, basically it adjusts the timeline in each of the different sections where this is addressed. So it has amendments to several different articles, the bylaws, Article 4, or Article and Article 6, and specifies how the elections would change for 2022 and in 2023. The whole overall idea is to keep all the elections the same in the spring of 2022, and then move the meet and confer chairs and the negotiations representatives to the fall of 2023, which would be the first year in a 2-year cycle to renegotiate our contract. And then at the very end, we have suggestions for shortening the nomination window to 30 days and shortening the voting time period to 7 days. And then the idea would be that all the elections that happen in the fall, the new officers would be seated at the beginning of our fiscal year, which is January, for our first January meetings, as their first meeting. And the reason I personally like this idea is because the restructure committee thought that the delegate assembly would be meeting every other year or something like that. And that's turned out not to be true. And I would really personally love to see us have nominations for statewide offices again at the delegate assembly. That was one of the highlights of the assembly for me every year for as long as I've been participating. So with that, that's the summary. And do you guys have any questions for me?
Thanks, Todd. I wonder, do you want to speak at all to why this timeline is being proposed? Why the 2023 would be the first election?
Yeah, we discussed waiting for next year's delegate assembly to propose this. But I think if we're going to do this, it makes sense to elect people in the spring of 2022, knowing that they're going to have an extra 6 months in their term as an obligation to fulfill before they run for office. So the idea is if we pass it this fall, folks who are running next spring know that their term is going to be extended by those 6 months instead of just surprising them a year from now.
Yeah. Or doing it now, and then the people that are seated at this point would be extended for 6 months, which seems to be a conflict of interest.
That I agree. That doesn't seem like the fair and legitimate way to do it. So we've taken the longer timeline approach to hopefully do it right.
Yep. Okay, thanks for speaking to that. Nicholas Snavely.
Yes, Todd, could you elaborate on the extent of the length of voting now? Is it 14 days? And then could you give us a little details on when do we see most people voting? I know it's probably initially, but do we see a second uptick in voting, maybe the second week when a reminder is sent out, or what's the makeup of voting when it does occur, so that folks, say they're off on vacation for a week or whatever, might miss it with the 7-day vote. So
yeah, that's a really good question. I have not seen the actual numbers, but what I've heard is that voting is the most popular, like the day that the ballots are released, and then the last day of voting. And then Big Pulse, if I understand things correctly, does send out reminders during the voting window. So there is some concern that somebody's going to be on vacation and miss it. But the way technology works and how portable it is, anybody who's an active MAPE member, I think, understands that elections are coming up and can be tuned in to elections. So we can amend that, or you can propose an amendment if you want to see that 2-week window stay there. But the shorter answer is we see most votes come in, to my understanding, on the first day and the last day.
yeah, thank you for that clarification. I wasn't sure if it's currently a 14-day window for voting. If it is, that's I guess that kind of makes sense. Getting closer to this shorter window to help speed things along, I understand the encouragement to do that as well. And so, maybe if the amendment was done, moving it to 8 or 9 days, just to get a few more days into that next week, so that folks, if they were gone, might get that. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Just for example, with our most recent election that went out from not an election, but the vote that went out from Big Pulse on our contract, 20% of our members voted on day one. So it's a huge number of people that vote on the first day of these things. And this is kind of an attempt to, if Todd, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is just an attempt to kind of shorten the entire window proportionally. And then see how it works from there. And maybe, we meet every year at Delegate Assembly. So other resolutions to fix any problems that come about from this, if it passes, could certainly be brought to.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm getting a message from staff that we can also send ballots to members' personal email addresses if they can't access their state accounts because they're away on vacation or some other reason.
Excellent. That is good to know.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Todd on resolution number 7? Okay. Well, you all are incredibly impeccable with timing. We have just 2 minutes left in our hour here, so that's amazing. We have gone through all 7 for the most part. We didn't go through resolution number 2 from John Ferrara. So if there's any questions, please come to the next resolution forum, which is tomorrow over the lunch hour. I hope that you all now have a better understanding of the proposals. You are also encouraged, if you have outstanding questions and can't make it tomorrow, to reach out to the authors of the resolutions, or to me. I can help get you in touch with those folks if you don't know who they are. Thanks again for attending today's forum. Thanks especially to the authors of the resolutions for their thoughtful presentations, for looking through our governing documents, and for bringing things forward that they noticed as a potential gap for our union siblings to hear. So tell your friends and colleagues that the final resolution forum is tomorrow at noon. I will see you all bright and early at 8 o'clock in the morning this Saturday, September 18th. Just a reminder that you can sign in as early as 7 a.m. if you'd like to. So with that, again, thanks for being here and enjoy your evening.